The words of joy and hope. Passion Sunday, Passion of Jesus ERP. Commentary by Fernando Armelini. A good Sunday to all. Today, biblical scholars are almost unanimously in saying that to the base of the narrations of the four evangelists, there is an original older story written a few years after what happened. It is a narrative that is taken almost to the letter from Mark, the oldest of the evangelists. Why this affirmation? When we read the text, we notice the many times the high priest is mentioned, but without mentioning the name. The other evangelists who were inspired in this oldest text, and they followed it as a scheme of events when they caught the high priest. They always add Caiaphas. In the original text written soon after the events, the name of Caiaphas is not cited because he was still in charge. And as Caiaphas falls in the year 36, this original text of the Passion should have been written within these 6 years. It is a story they appreciated, very appreciated by Christians of the first generation, and read it frequently in meetings. We ask ourselves why? Because it was important that Christians were always contemplating the true face of God, the face of the God who is love and only love, and that had been revealed on Calvary in the face of Jesus who gives his life. People always wanted to see the face of God. We can recall Moses when he asks the Lord, "Show me your face." Then the psalmist, "Do not hide your face, Lord. I am looking for your face, Lord." Reading this passage, the Christian community contemplated this face of the God of love. This primitive text was taken by the four evangelists who added details. Some emphasis to highlight the themes of the catechesis that were important and urgent for their community. Today we will concentrate on the text of Mark. This primitive text, also loved by the first community, is practically preserved in full. And that is why with emotion, we approach this page. And we can imagine that we are listening to this reading among the Christians of the very first community of Jerusalem. We will only stop over some details that are present only in Mark's narrative. We begin by paying attention to the first characteristic. Mark, unlike the other evangelists, highlights the very human reactions of Jesus when he faces death that awaits him. In Mark, Jesus is scared, terrified. Let us listen. Jesus and his disciples came to a place named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be troubled and distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is sorrowful even to death. Remain here and keep watch." he advanced a little and fell to the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass by him. Only Mark notices that being in the Garden of Olives, Jesus realizes that they were looking for him to kill him. He says, he began to be troubled and distressed. The other evangelists avoid presenting Jesus with fear, agitated by an almost uncontrollable fear. History remembers so many heroes who have accepted death with serenity, with contempt for suffering. Think of Socrates, who, after having spoken calmly about the immortality of the soul with his disciples, he takes the cup with hemlock and drinks the poison calmly. Then he asks his disciple, Creton, to offer a rooster of Asclepius, the god of health, because for Socrates, death was a cure of the fragile condition in which man lives. Jesus does not align with these characters. Jesus has cried. He was afraid of death because he loved life, this earthly reality. And in Gethsemane, he sought out some who understood him. From those who were close to him at the most dramatic moment of his life, he could even flee. He is scared in front of death. It's comforting for us that the events have occurred as described by Mark. When contemplating this Jesus man, not Superman, our companion of sufferings, we feel him as our neighbor, one of us. When life puts us in front of a very tough test, even in the face of death, we are frightened. And if that difficult moment is not seen in the light of God, we can lose our heads and do something foolish. Jesus teaches us how to face these situations, praying. In Gethsemane, Jesus prayed thus, Abba, Father, all things are possible to you. Take this cup away from me, but not what I will, but what you will. Only Mark, referring to the prayer of Jesus to the Father in Gethsemane, mentions the Aramaic name that Jesus has used, Abba. The rabbis said that when a creature began to taste the wheat, that is, when he or she was weaned, they began to say Abba and Ima. These are the first words the child begins to utter. They do not say dad, they say ba or ma for dad and mom. Adults avoided using this childish expression Abba, but they took it back when the parents were already old, worn out, and began to call them Abba, to give the impression that they were still children, and therefore also the father should still feel young. Abba is a child's word because it alludes to trust, to the tenderness of Jesus in relation to the Father. And this same word, Jesus will put it on our lips in prayer, because when we turn to God, we must cultivate this trust and this tenderness. we, like adults in Jesus' time, find it difficult to use this word that in English is translated as daddy, an expression that children use with their dad. Then, once they grow up, they no longer use it. Jesus wants us to cultivate this relationship he had with the Father. It is the invitation to never hesitate, even in the face of the most absurd situations, knowing that God is close and He loves us. And this prayer helps us to always remember that He is Abba and that our life is in His hands, and therefore we are in good hands. We can only understand this by praying it in all the difficult moments of our lives. Did Jesus address the Father and call Him Abba when He could doubt that He was a Father who could accompany Him? No. He manifested all His faith and trust in the Father. There is another characteristic in Mark's narrative. No reaction by Jesus to the passage of the two gestures that occur during the arrest in Gethsemane. First, Jesus does not say a word when Judas gives him a kiss. Then he does not react when one of the present puts his hand on the sword. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, accompanied by a crowd with swords and clubs, who had come from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. His betrayer had arranged a signal with them, saying, "The man I shall kiss is the one. Arrest him and lead him away securely." He came and immediately went over to him and said, "Rabbi," and he kissed him. At this, they laid hands on him and arrested him. One of the bystanders drew his sword, struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his ear. Jesus said to them in reply, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to seize me? Day after day I was with you, teaching in the temple area. Yet you did not arrest me, but that the scripture may be fulfilled." The other evangelists referred to some words that Jesus addressed to Judas. For example, Luke says, "Judas, with a kiss, you betray the Son of Man." And Matthew, when Peter puts his hand to the sword, referred to the words of Jesus, "Put your sword in the scabbard." Mark presents Jesus, who does not defend himself against the events that he cannot prevent. He accepts almost passively what is happening to him, and at the end says only that this is the way the scripture is fulfilled. What does the evangelist Mark wants us to understand with this silence of Jesus? He wants to make the Christians of his community contemplate a meek and helpless Jesus who surrenders to the hands of his enemies without reacting. There are moments in our life when we cannot do anything but accept events. The one who has accepted the proposal of a new man made by Jesus must take into account that it is still living next to the kingdom of beasts. These are those who have not agreed to join Jesus, as Judas, for example, in the new world, in the new humanity. Christians must know that they must also face falsehood, hypocrisy, injustice, violence, which are behaviors that still belong to the ancient world. How to react in these situations? Mark puts in front of the disciples the figure of Jesus so that we may behave as Jesus does. Then in Mark, Jesus does not say a word of reprobation to the foolish gesture of Peter when he puts his hand to the sword. That gesture is very far from the evangelical principle that is not even necessary to take it into consideration. Peter was still involved in solving problems according to the criteria of the world. In fact, Jesus had already told him, "You react according to the people, not according to God." The disciples who, like Peter, consider starting the new world using the old, using the methods of the world such as violence, the use of force, not only do not create a new world, but they worsen the ancient kingdom. The one who uses violence always moves away from the teacher and then plunges into the darkness of the night, as Peter did. All the evangelists tell that the disciples, as soon as they realize that Jesus does not react, that he does not fight, they all left him and fled. But only Mark remembers a curious detail. After Jesus was arrested, everyone abandoned him and fled. Now, a young man followed him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth about his body. They seized him, but he left the cloth behind and ran off naked. The details of this young man who escapes is marginal. We wonder why the evangelist has mentioned it. The common interpretation is to consider it as an autobiographical detail. In fact, tradition has identified Mark himself in this boy. But we wonder if this scene, that is apparently a bit funny, has a symbolic meaning. I think we can deduce the message by paying attention to some words that the evangelist Mark uses. The first is neanikos in Greek. Young, an 18-year-old, and we find that in the Gospel of Mark, this term appears only here, and then when another young man who appears in the sepulchre on Easter Day, clad in a white garment, that says to the women, "You look for Jesus, the crucified one. He is not here." This young man in Gethsemane was wrapped in a white vestment. But the Greek term used by Mark is sheet, naked, wrapped in a sheet. The dead man, naked, was wrapped in a sheet to be placed in the tomb. What does Mark wants to suggest? The guards managed to capture the young man just as they captured Jesus. But what does this young man leave in the hands of the guards? The sheet, as he flees naked. The young man referred to by Mark is the image of what is happening to Jesus. They have captured Jesus, but what will Jesus leave in the hands of the guards? At the service of the power of this world? He will leave the sheet, not his person. In Jesus, the life of the eternal was present in fullness. And this eternal life escapes the powers of this world. It is exactly what happens to us too, because we have also received the gift of this life of the eternal. And then our biological life grows more and more to its conclusion, each with each passing day. When we come to the conclusion of our life, what is it that the world can hold? Our remains, the sheet, not our person. Contemplating the scene of this young man, we see what has happened with Jesus. Like this young man, Jesus has also left his sheet to enter the life where one is always young. What happened to Jesus is the image of what happens to all his disciples. After having left our remains, we shall enter an eternally young life. Another characteristic of the person according to Mark, the passion according to Mark, is the silence of Jesus. In the narration of the passion according to Mark, Jesus is always silent. In front of the religious authorities, when they ask him if he is the Messiah, and in front of Pilate, who wants to know if he is king, he simply says, "I am," then nothing more. The high priest stood in the middle and asked Jesus, "Do you not answer anything to what they declare against you?" He remained silent without answering anything. The chief priests accused him of many things. Again, Pilate questioned him, "Have you no answer? See how many things they accuse you of." Jesus gave him no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. During the process, not a single word comes out of Jesus' mouth. Facing insults, provocations, and lies in front of the false testimonies, Jesus is silent. He does not respond to anything. He knows that whoever wants to condemn him is aware of his innocence. He already knew that his enemies had decreed his death. Therefore, it is not worth getting down to their level. Starting a discussion with them would be useless. That's why he is silent. There is a silence that is a sign of weakness, of lack of courage, like that of the one who does not intervene to denounce injustices because he is a coward. One that seeks more his interest than the truth. One does not want to antagonize powerful people from whom they receive favors. This is a cowardly silence. But there is a silence that is a sign of strength, of encouragement. The silence of the one who does not react to provocations, the one who does not wobble in the face of arrogance, to insult, to slander. It is the noble silence of who is convinced of his own loyalty, of his own righteousness, and he is sure that the just cause for which he is pursuing will end by triumphing. The Christian is not a coward who resigns himself, who does not fight against evil. He is one who loves truth and justice more than his own life. Also the strength to keep quiet, as the teacher has done, not to resort to the means employed for whoever harasses them, slander, disloyalty, violence. He knows that the triumph of lies is, in the end, ephemeral. All the evangelists tell that after the enthusiastic reception of Jesus, the crowd gradually moved away from him. And in the end, Jesus ended up only with the 12. And also these escaped at the time of the decisive decision. But nobody like Mark highlights the loneliness of Jesus during the Passion. Let us listen. Those passing by reviled him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself by coming down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests with the scribes mocked him among themselves and said, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also kept abusing him. At noon, darkness came over the whole world, the whole land, until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Reading the story of the Passion of the other evangelists, we always find someone close to Jesus. For example, the evangelist John remembers the beloved disciple and remembers Peter, who follows Jesus at least until certain moment. Matthew remembers Pilate's wife telling her husband, "Do not mess with this man, because of him I was disturbed in my dreams tonight." Luke recalls that on the road to Calvary there is a great crowd. They are the women who follow Jesus. Then on Calvary, Luke remembers the good thief. But in Mark, during the Passion, there is no one. Jesus is rejected by the people who prefer Barabbas. He is ridiculed and humiliated by the soldiers, insulted by those who pass by, and by the people's authorities who are present at Calvary. At his side, there is no one. Only at the end, Mark notes that there were some women who watched from afar. He was completely alone. Jesus has suffered anguish, has committed himself to the just cause, but he feels defeated. And his cry, my God, why have you abandoned me?" is a scream that seems scandalous, but that expresses his inner drama at the time of his death. Jesus has experienced impotence, experienced failure in the fight against injustice, against lying. He feels defeated. He who strives to live coherently the life of a new man, who wants to build the new world as Jesus has done, must take into account that the crucial moment can be abandoned by the friends, rejected even by same family, feeling also abandonment abandons God, who does not perform any prodigy in his favor. And at this moment, you can also scream like Jesus. But you should scream with Jesus. At the culminating moment of Jesus' passion, according to Mark, we have the profession of faith. Not of one of the disciples, but of the centurion at the foot of the cross. It is the most important moment of the Gospel according to Mark. One of the soldiers ran, soaked a sponge with wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink saying, "Wait, let us see if Elijah comes to take him down." And Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. The veil of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion who stood facing him saw how he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." From the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, people ask, "Who is this that casts out demons? Who makes wonders?" Also the disciples wonder, "Who is this to whom the waves of the sea obey?" But nobody understood his true identity. And when someone proclaims that he is the Son of God, remember that from the beginning, in the synagogue of Capernaum, the demoniac shouts, "I know who you are, the saint of God." Immediately Jesus says, "Shut up." This silence is always imposed by Jesus. No one should reveal his identity. Why? Because in front of the prodigies that he makes his identity could be misunderstood. That is, that he be considered a Messiah according to the expectation of the people. A glorious, victorious, dominating Messiah who performs miracles and wonders. No. Jesus came to reveal the true face of God, and this face of God was revealed in fullness, in a very precise moment of his life. It will be on Calvary. What happens on Calvary? The disciples all escaped. The people who watched him are no longer there. They have disappeared. But there is a centurion, the one in charge of the soldiers who have crucified Jesus. The text says, when the centurion saw how he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." When this expression was said by someone during public life, Jesus immediately imposed silence. Here, Jesus cannot impose silence because he is already dead. From now on, they can proclaim his identity as Son of God, because now there are no more possibilities of being mistaken. He is the Son of God because he reveals the face of the Father of heaven. The expression "son of" means similar to or more than generated from. Here, the one who recognizes in the face of Jesus the face of the Father are not the disciples but the centurion, a Roman soldier. Since then, everyone will recognize in Jesus the Son of God because seeing how he expired, that is, seeing how much love he has witnessed. The total gift of life is the ultimate sign of love. And it is this sign of love that reveals the face of God in fullness. And this identity is what the centurion recognizes. It is in this context that the meaning is clear about the veil of the temple that slits from top to bottom. The evangelist Mark uses the same verb used at the time of Jesus' baptism, when it is said that the skies were broken, schizo, which means breaking in such a way that it can no longer be repaired. what was considered as the seven heavens, at the top of which was the throne of God, had collapsed. They were closed and now collapsed. The harmony between heaven and the earth was restored. People had suffered the silence of God because God no longer sent prophets, or the people did not listen to them. Now the heavens were torn. God has sent His Son. The peace between heaven and earth has been restored. And not only did the heavens tear, so also all the barriers of the earth have fallen. These barriers that prevented finding the Lord. The veil of the temple separated the holy of the holy, the holy of the holies. It was in the holy of holies where it was thought that God was present. The Lord, the God of Israel, and only the high priest could enter there once a year. Now this veil has been torn from top to bottom. It is not a material break of the veil of the temple. A much more extraordinary prodigy has passed. Now the Father's house is open for all His sons and daughters. Everyone can enter the house, even if they are sinners, because God considers each person as His son or daughter. After the death of Jesus, all the evangelists introduce Joseph of Arimathea on the scene, the influential member of the Sanhedrin, who presented himself to Pilate for authorization to bury the one who was crucified. But only Mark adds that it was a bold gesture. When it was already evening, since it was the day of preparation, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a distinguished member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, came and courageously went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was amazed that he was already dead. He summoned the centurion and asked him if Jesus had already died. And when he learned of it from the centurion, he gave the body to Joseph. Having bought a linen cloth, he took him down, wrapped him in the linen cloth, and laid him in a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance to the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, watched where he was laid. To declare oneself a disciple of Jesus when he is acclaimed by the crowd is easy. But to present oneself as his friend against the authority that has condemned him is a great daring. And it is this boldness that Mark emphasizes on the figure of Joseph of Arimathea. Mark wanted to give a message to his community, and this message is very current even for our communities today. The evangelist wanted to present this figure to his Christians and to us, because often the disciples become inconsistent, opportunistic, weak, lacking in courage when it is necessary to profess one's faith in front of those who do not accept it and are tempted to be ashamed even about moral values that Christ has taught, perhaps to avoid inconveniences, perhaps only not to be ridiculed. They are easily adapted to the current morality. The evangelist Mark says, the true disciple is a bold person. He gives testimony with his life and also with his word on the proposal of a new man that Jesus came to bring. I wish everyone a good Sunday and a good preparation for Easter.